Disclaimer, this video kind of assumes that you already have knowledge on One Piece because I am not explaining all that. And spoilers up to 1187. The final saga of One Piece has started, and with it, a lot of questions have started arising, including, who will be the main bad guy? Emu or Blackbeard? Well, I'm here to introduce a new perspective to this question. And let it be known, I'm fully aware that I'm incredibly biased when I'm proposing this theory.
What about me makes you assume I'm biased?
However, 6 months ago, I was visited by a prophetic dream. Yeah. I saw one other person suggest this theory on TikTok, and I will put their link below. But again, this theory kind of started in my head like 6 months ago, and it's been building a bit. I have proof of Discord screenshots that I did think of this before, but I'll still want to credit them because they did give me the confidence to say this out loud, because I feel clinically insane. I am somewhat aware that the conclusions I'm coming through are a bit out there and might be wrong, but I do think there is some merit to the questions I'm asking. And I want you to follow along with me as I explain to you the theory that I've lovingly dubbed Koby is the devil from the Bible. Yes.
Shadow, it's me, the devil.
Like I said, this is more coming from me trying to answer a bunch of questions, so I want to explain to you the questions that I had. The first question really is, what is Koby's role? Because he is basically one of the first characters we are introduced to that isn't in a backstory. Even before any of the Straw Hats, Oda felt it was important to introduce us to this little pink-haired twink, and then he is kind of set up as a future rival for Luffy. Koby's role. So, question 1, Koby's role as Luffy's rival. If you come into my comment section and saying that Koby is not Luffy's rival,
keeping up with them is going to be a real challenge. I can't kid myself about this. Just you wait! We're gonna get tougher and tougher! You'll see next time when we all meet in the new world! Farewell!
Koby might not have been very present in the story, but he is technically one of Luffy's rivals. Again, he's from the start been introduced as a future threat to Luffy, to the point that when Zoro and Luffy leave the island with Koby on it, the narrator tells us that they've made a great mistake. There's two interpretations you could have of that. One, it's a joke about them just not having a plan, or two, that is some crazy-ass foreshadowing for when Koby becomes a problem. Because the narrator doesn't really talk all that much, and it feels significant to tell us as an audience that they made a mistake and then never elaborating on what that mistake is. And if you're gonna be like, well, Koby's not strong enough to be Luffy's rival, that's not the point, and you've not been paying attention to One Piece at all. Because One Piece has never been about strength. One Piece is about willpower, and if there's one thing Koby has, is willpower. And even Zoro acknowledges this. He sees the potential in Koby, and even mentions it as a future rival to them.
Well, Luffy, you've done it again. You found another powerful rival for our crew to fight.
So he is a future rival. Their fight has been set up.
If Koby says he can do it, then I believe him.
But also, we have to look at the time that Koby has been training. Koby's been training for 2 years, and he is capable of a lot. When we see him in Water 7, he's only been training for like a few months, and he can already do like some of the 6 powers. And like, it's a bit sad, really, because at that point, Koby going from 0 to being able to do like a shave is really impressive. But at that point, because Luffy is so much further ahead of him, Luffy has already beaten Rob Lucci at this point. So him being able to do the 6 powers is like, yeah, we've already beaten those guys. But it doesn't take away from the fact that Koby is someone who learns really fast and has been on a steady increase of power. Yes, he is not at Luffy's level. I'm not saying that. But he is a future threat. And with that comes that second question. How? How is Koby gonna be a threat if he is not strong enough? Oda even reminds us that Koby is a future threat, with the scene of him saying,
I'm sorry, but I'll make sure your dream won't come true.
Luffy, I'm gonna have to stop you from achieving your dream. Which, I will say, that is a scene that is heavily misinterpreted. We see Koby thinking back to Luffy telling him his dream of finding the One Piece.
The treasure you're looking for is the One Piece itself!
Right after hearing Vegapunk's message. Koby is not saying, I want to stop Luffy specifically. No, he is saying, I want the One Piece because now I understand what it means to gain the One Piece. And I know, because I know Luffy, that getting the One Piece is his dream, so inevitably we will have to go toe-to-toe. And I'm okay with that. That's what he's saying. He is saying very specifically, I want to get the One Piece, not I want to stop Luffy specifically. And again, it's setting up Koby as a threat. Koby is this Chekhov's gun that's been sitting in the back of One Piece since Chapter 2! And technically, Episode 1, if you want to take the anime into account. He's just been there, hanging out, with a loaded gun. And we still don't know how he will be a threat. Because yeah, he is not strong enough. So like, how is Oda gonna make that make sense? How is Oda gonna make that matchup between them feel significant and deserved? If you're gonna be like, oh, Koby's not been important for like a really long time, him being there since like Chapter 2 doesn't really matter. You need to understand how Oda wrote One Piece. He started out, he made the start, and he already had the ending in mind, right? He had the ending. So everything he made here is set up, right? Everything here is set up for the payoff. And then at some point, he started setting up more pieces. And then he went, you know what? Let me improvise. And then he made up all this shit. He made up all that shit, and like the ending kept getting further away from us. The ending kept getting further away from us. But like at some point, the setup that we have here since the start is gonna become relevant again for the ending. Which we're seeing with Shanks right now, where Shanks has been a character we've known since Chapter 1 and we didn't really know anything about. We've only started like getting stuff about him right here, because that was stuff set up, and then all that stuff in the middle kind of got in the way. Because all that stuff is only important for the ending. I believe Koby is the same. I think Oda had a plan for Koby since the beginning, and then all of this kind of got in the way. The stuff we have right now, Koby very recently telling us, hey, I'm gonna go for the One Piece. We need to look at it from his perspective, because he just got back from Blackbeard. Which is important, right? Because he doesn't want to stop pirates like Luffy. He doesn't really care about that. He cares about stopping pirates like Blackbeard. Every conversation Koby has with Blackbeard, every time Blackbeard shows up, it radicalizes that little boy even further, because Blackbeard is everything Koby hates about pirates. And Koby then coming back from his encounter with Blackbeard, and not just coming back, but having lost Garp to Blackbeard, technically, it puts him into a position where he needs the One Piece. Not because, again, he wants to stop Luffy, because he is spiteful for Luffy or something. He doesn't care, right? but he cares about stopping someone like Blackbeard from getting the One Piece. That's the important part, is he does not want a more dangerous pirate to get the One Piece. He wants that for himself so he can control what happens. How are we gonna do that, little boy? Let's look at our other options for a major antagonist. Emu. This video is made after 1187. I don't know when I'll edit this, and when this comes out. I've just read 1187. In Elbaf, it feels really early to be showing off Emu, right? Like, we're showing our cards very early on, and it is maybe to build a threat level for Emu, but it feels very early. What I find very interesting is the fact that Emu could have possibly been friends with Joy Boy. It feels very significant that we have this kind of dynamic where Emu seems to hate Joy Boy very, very much, but also might have been friends with them. If we look at what we know of the Void Century, the 20 Kingdoms got together to fight Joy Boy, to stop Joy Boy from doing something. And Joy Boy was part of this kind of heavily advanced kind of society. And I'm very interested in what conflict was about. Like, what moral differences were there between Emu and Joy Boy, outside of the obvious of Emu kind of being like a dictator, and Joy Boy definitely not being a dictator. Vegapunk even says that he doesn't know for sure if there was a bad or good side in this conflict, and it could have been a bit more of a genuinely moral gray area in disagreeing on how to rule the world or something. It could have been a genuine moral conflict, and that makes me very fascinated what that says about Emu's morals and what that says about Joy Boy's morals. If we look at the arcs that build up towards Emu's reveal, Egghead and Elbaf, and the major backstories within those arcs, they are about good intentions. Both Kuma and Harold's stories are about someone selling their body and mind to the government, kind of naive attempt at doing good. Both these backstories are about self-sacrifice and naive good intentions. One of the things that is really important in understanding Oda as a writer and understanding how he writes things is he tends to create mini-stories with certain themes to reuse later. So you'll have an arc that will touch upon a certain theme or concept, and then he will reuse that in a larger scale, sure that we already understand this concept and he can build upon it. And I find that very fascinating, that we have these two really important backstories about self-sacrifice and naivety and good intentions, and how that'll sell your soul to the literal devil. I find that interesting. There is this line in one of Emu's monologues where Loki asks them, how did you become a giant? Because Emu magically became a giant. And Emu says that everyone has the capacity to do that. Just anyone can become a giant. And he starts talking about how everyone, every creature, every being naturally craves power, and how there is this shortcut to power through submission, and how that is how power gets corrupted. And he very specifically also talks about envy and all that stuff, and it's very interesting.
Strength is an attribute people naturally crave, and yet that craving can be easily satisfied via corruption. It merely requires one to submit their will to a covenant. When their envy drives them, they'll achieve power. Those three things together form a trinity known as dominion.
Emu does not sound like someone who won against Joy Boy fairly. Like, Emu is still scared of Joy Boy, and is very petty about it. Which again makes me feel like Joy Boy was actually stronger, but Emu did something to win the war that was maybe a bit unfair, or maybe had them submit their free will in some way. So, the way Ymir talks about power is very similar to how Vegapunk describes devil fruits. The concept of dreams and the concept of if only I could be like that. People being able to change their power and their being through a magic fruit, manifested from their will to be like that. Sounds very similar to Ymir saying that anyone technically has the capacity to become a giant or do whatever they want as long as they are willing to go for it. And I find, though, the phrasing about envy very interesting. Because envy stems from admiration. You need to admire someone before you can envy them. You need to see their qualities as positives. And I think that might be the case with Emu and Joy Boy, where Emu admired Joy Boy, and that's what made them envious. When I look at Joy Boy and Emu, I think their conflict was something between anarchy and totalitarianism. Something between anarchy and totalitarianism. I don't know the word. I want to ask everyone very nicely to not make fun of me in the comments. I am not natively English, and I'm also very dyslexic. You know which word I mean. Totalitarianism. I genuinely can't say it. Please do not make fun of me. If Emu somehow believed that whatever Joy Boy believed could hurt the world, what did that mean for that conflict? I really enjoy the idea of Emu having had good intentions, that he genuinely believed that whatever Joy Boy wanted or whatever Joy Boy was doing could have harmed the world. And I'm not gonna go into the Harley text and all that shit, and like how Nika is also viewed as the god of destruction and all that. But I do think there could have been this conflict where, in the pursuit of trying not to let anarchy consume the world, because maybe anarchy is a scary thing to a lot of people, even though anarchy ultimately just means freedom, maybe that could have been the thing that pushed Emu to fascism. And like, obviously I know that whatever I'm saying right now is kind of headcanon-y and like theory stuff and my interpretations of these characters, but like, that's all theory making is, really. And like, you can see the parallels I'm putting out, right? So like, Davy Jones. Davy Jones was said to be cursed by a demon or devil, depending on the translation, to exist under the sea. A demon or devil. Sound familiar? It's Emu, right? It's Emu. Which would make sense with Rox coming after Emu and having that promise of killing Emu. Rox showing up in the flower room and promising to kill Emu is another Chekhov's gun. Right. We have the Chekhov's guns. So, and when we talk about parallels and all that stuff, we have three players. We have Emu. You have Emu, who represents totalitarianism. Law. He's our law representative. He likes the government. We have Joy Boy, who represents anarchy, but specifically anarchy through collectivism. And then we have Mr. Davy Jones, who is anarchy through individualism. We very, very little know about Davy Jones himself, but based on his followers, we can assume that he is anarchy through individualism. So we have a follow-up. We have Roger, Luffy, and then we have obviously Rox and Blackbeard. Notice something? Notice how this section is completely empty? Which makes sense, right? It makes sense that Emu does not have someone to carry on their will, even though carrying on will is such a major part of One Piece. Why? Emu never died, and Emu is also not the type of person to believe that they can't die. I think they would never... I also don't like Emu child theories, like Emu having a kid. That's a separate thing. I don't think Emu would. The idea of like a noble having a kid is always kind of stemming from the idea of someone carrying on your blood and your family name. I think Emu is too selfish and too self-absorbed to believe that they would ever need that. I don't think they would believe they would ever need someone to success them, because they will always be around. Emu will always be there. They've been there for 800 years, so they don't need someone to carry on their will. We all agree that between Roger and Rox goes Garp, right? And wouldn't you happen to know that there is coincidentally a character that's a friend of Luffy, who is actively stated to be willing to go against Luffy, who happens to have beef with Blackbeard specifically, and happens to be the follow-up of Garp. It's Koby, right? But due to Emu never having, like, a successor, this would never make sense. But it does sort of make sense, because Luffy, Koby, Blackbeard, Roger, Garp, Rox, right? Right? I'm not crazy. I feel crazy. Things that are not there, but they are. They are there. This makes sense. So, talking about Koby and Blackbeard, this is kind of a side note that, like, in the subject of asking questions, this is kind of a side note, but when we talk about Koby and Blackbeard, one of the things that is very interesting is the Rocky Port incident, right? Which had Koby teaming up with two pirates, Blackbeard and Law. And we know so very little about it. And, like, it's where Koby got his title as hero, but most likely he saved a bunch of civilians, right? And he teamed up with Law and Blackbeard, an uneasy alliance, which does showcase something about Koby as a character, because he is willing to break his own moral code if it means saving civilians. Koby is willing to break rules if it means saving people. But also, both Law and Blackbeard are famously schemer characters. They view relationships as transactional, and I know Law is not a terrible person, but that is a character trait of his. And that is a character trait of Blackbeard's as well, to an even more extreme extent. They are both schemers, they are both planners, they are both people who view relationships as transactional, and I find it interesting that that's the two characters that Oda chose to put Koby with. Feels like he's drawing a parallel. On a different note, Koby's name. Koby's name could have a few different meanings. It could either mean Koby as in the Japanese word for flattery, or Koby as in the shade of pink. And most likely, knowing Oda, that's the pun, right? Oda is very literal with his names. It's probably a pun on both of these. But the name also comes from the name Jacob, which means supplanter. That's the name that... Koby's name means supplanter. And I feel insane and crazy, because probably it means nothing. But is the name being supplanter? Which feels significant, and it's not just... the name Jacob comes from the Bible. It's a story of two twin brothers, where the younger brother, Jacob, kind of tricked himself into getting his older brother's birthright. His older brother's hair is red. And, like, I'm going so far into things that don't matter, because like the chance of Oda having thought that far ahead with Koby's name, it's probably impossible. But I do find it significant. And this is a different side tangent. But again, Oda likes to reuse concepts, right? And we have this consistent theme, or it's not even a theme, just this consistent thing of two brothers. One is a noble or something akin to that, and the other one is a pirate or a criminal or something akin to that. We most obviously have Doflamingo and Rosinante, which specifically Doflamingo is such a heavy parallel to Emu and Sabo and Stelly. Stelly is how we get introduced to the concept of the empty throne as a whole, which feels, again, significant. Two brothers, one a noble, the other one isn't. And then we have, obviously, Shanks and Shamrock. As someone who's been joking about Emu and Joy Boy having world's craziest situationship, I regret to inform that they were probably brothers. And maybe not literal brothers. They could not, maybe they weren't blood brothers. But they were probably brothers. And again, these ties are circumstantial at best. The chances of Oda having tied the concept of Emu being Joy Boy's brother to Koby's name being from the name Jacob from the Bible, insane. Crazy. Probably not the case. I'm thinking about it. So, like, we're setting up a lot of things. Again, we get back to the Chekhov's guns, right? We get back to the Chekhov's guns. Again, it is established that there's promise from the Davy clan to kill Emu. That's a loaded Chekhov's gun that needs to go off. Blackbeard needs to be the one to kill Emu. But Emu's been set up so heavily as the final bad guy. Right? And I personally would find it slightly disappointing if this story that so heavily revolves around the concept of fighting the government, right? Fighting the establishment and giving people the right to autonomy and the right to choose who they are governed by. It's not inherently anti-government, but it is anti-dictatorship, right? It's the people get to choose who they are ruled by. I would find it a bit weird for the final antagonist to not be the government. And I would find it a bit weird if the government was technically defeated by some other guy, even if we get to fight the other guy. And technically speaking, yes, I am aware the most common consensus, and like when we look at Koby's beef with Blackbeard, there is a really high chance that that will just result in Koby and Luffy teaming up to fight Blackbeard the same way that Garp and Roger teamed up against Rocks. The thing with that is, though, Roger and Garp didn't team up against Rocks because they had beef with Rocks. They had beef with Emu, technically. They didn't know that fully in what was happening. But the reason Rocks was killed was because he was possessed. So I don't think that parallel functions on a thematic level. I accept them fighting Blackbeard, but I don't accept the idea of Blackbeard being the final villain. Because the final villain needs to be the government. So what I am saying, corruption does not just come from bad people. Corruption comes from power. Systems like the world government and the Marines prey on the concept of good intentions. Make people believe there's an enemy and you can get them fighting for you. The Marines will tell you, pirates are bad, therefore we need to defeat them. And so people are willing to join your army. And with that, now you have an army to oppress people with. But that does not mean that the good intentions of those Marines was not to help people. That's their genuine good intentions. They want to help people. They've been told that they can be a hero if they fight for justice. We see that with Harold, who was kind of strung along by the government, promised that he would get what he wanted, only to be used as a weapon, right? Like, he did all of that to kind of get away from his people being viewed as violent and warmongering, only to get reduced to a weapon of the government. And it's the same with Kuma. One Piece's thesis statement is about giving people an active role in fighting against oppression. And this is very directly shown with Luffy and Koby. Luffy does not save Koby because he was treated poorly. He saved Koby because Koby wanted to save himself. He waited for Koby to take an active role in fighting against oppression. And at that point, Luffy is willing to stand by people and help them achieve that. But they need to be willing to achieve it first. Hold out your hand and wait for someone to take it. You can't force someone by their hand to save them. They need to do it themselves. They need to be able to stand on their own 2 feet. And the Navy inherently takes away that autonomy from people by being the force they rely on to protect them. And the thing is, I could see Koby being terrified with the idea of Blackbeard gaining any kind of power, being the one to kill Emu, even if Koby does not, and then I want to say Koby does not know about Emu, obviously, but like if in a desperate situation, something bad happens and Koby understands that Blackbeard has too much power, then that would be the worst outcome for him. Then that kind of gets into the idea of lawlessness being inherently evil, because he can only look at that ideal of anarchy through individualism, where the strong oppress the weak, whereas it is about anarchy and lawlessness through collectivism, where we help to uphold each other. But being taken and looking at only the bad side of that, and only looking at Blackbeard and not at Luffy, but only at the worst of what pirates have to bring, that's scary, and that is something that you can then fall into believing cannot and should not be allowed to happen. That's how fashion works. Could nudge Koby into a very dangerous direction, and like, he is not strong enough to prevent that from happening, but he could be if he makes the right deals with the devil. You know how this is Koby is the devil from the Bible theory? Yeah. He could become stronger with a little deal with the devil. We don't know enough about Emu's powers and how they work. It's notably different from a devil fruit. And devil fruits respawn. Does Emu's devil fruit respawn if they have a devil fruit at all? It's called the devil's fruit and not the human fruit model devil. Or how does this work? Is there an actual devil? Because if Luffy's devil fruit is based on a mythological figure, then so is Emu's. In the same way, Luffy's devil fruit has a will of their own with Nika. Maybe there is a devil inside of Emu. And what if Emu dies? What does that devil do? Does the devil try and find a new vessel? And if the devil needs a new vessel, who will they choose? Because Emu never set up a successor. I go back and forth in believing whether or not this is the case. Because on one hand, I'm seeing the parallels and the gaps, and then I look at it for way too long, and then I feel insane and crazy, and like, if I were to tell anyone about this, I think they would laugh in my face. And you're probably gonna laugh in my face. We have this trifecta, right? We have Blackbeard, we have Luffy, we have Koby. These two will definitely fight, right? These two are narrative foils. These are narrative foils. Their fight is inevitable. Then we have Koby, who views Blackbeard as like the worst pirates have to offer. And Blackbeard views Koby as valuable. He found the trade-off with Koby to be valuable, even after knowing that Koby is a sword agent, still viewed Koby as valuable and was kind of really mad about his crew losing his little twink. He was like, how could you lose my twink? Everything Koby has done post-time skip, basically everything, has to do with Blackbeard. With the Rockboard incident, and also the Pirate Island arc. And then we have these two, where Koby is willing to fight Luffy. He's willing to stop Luffy if he has to, even though he admires Luffy. Admiration could turn into envy. You get it? Admiration could turn into envy. And then Luffy is like, Koby's my friend. And like, I know this is hinging on the idea that Blackbeard does get to kill Emu, and Emu is not the final villain. Because Emu could still be the final villain. Blackbeard could also still be the final villain, but again, I feel as if thematically, outside of the fact that Blackbeard represents like an opposite Luffy, we need a law representative. And I don't mean in the way that I think Koby will become evil, but I think Koby will parallel Emu, and I don't know how literal that is. I don't know how literal it is. I don't know if he will actually turn into the devil, but I do think he will parallel Emu, and he will show how Emu got to this point. Because we know that Emu and Joyboy used to be friends, and I think this makes sense for Koby and Luffy's dynamic in how they view the world. He is capable of breaking his own moral code if it means he saves people. If he is put into a desperate situation where he thinks that so many people's lives will be at stake if he doesn't do something, and he knows he is not strong enough. Again, we're back to the questions. He knows he is not strong enough, but he wants to achieve this. He wants to fight Blackbeard, and he wants to fight Luffy. What will he do to get there? And I think he's gonna do something really fucking stupid. And I think he might, I don't know if he'll get possessed, but I think he might become the devil. I have a more extensive conspiracy board online for this. That goes a bit more into actual, like, very small little things, because silly thing. Emu's main ability, Dolly Reversey, is named after a board game. Reversey, which Reversey is kind of a smaller version of Go. I think it's really funny that Koby and Garp play Go in the live action, and I don't think that means anything. I don't think that means anything. But it'd be really fucking funny if you come out of this video and think, wow, this guy, he's really fucking insane. Yeah, I probably am. I want you to take away a few things from it. One, Koby is not to be underestimated. I think a lot of people underestimate Koby because he is weak. But One Piece has never been about physical strength. One Piece is about willpower. And if there's one thing we know about Koby, is that he is very willing to go above and beyond to become stronger. I don't think we can just go and say he will not be strong enough. Because yeah, he isn't. But Oda still feels him important enough to include. And if you've made it this far into the video, you think, wow, do you have any actual physical evidence? Have you ever looked at the image of, you know, the big panel with all of the characters who might have a chance at getting the One Piece, which includes Koby? Look at Koby's positioning in proximity to Emu. I feel insane. I need people to think with me. I think that's like, the thing is that ultimately I want other people to think with me. I don't want to be the guy that comes to an insane conclusion because I'm looking at the evidence correctly. I just don't have the information yet. This might not happen. But I do think I'm seeing things And I need people to think with me on these things and come up with me with answers. Because a lot of things are happening in my brain and I feel crazy and I feel insane, and Koby might be the devil from the Bible.
If you like this kind of content, please subscribe and like. And also, if you want to talk about more One Piece and especially Koby related stuff, I have a specific Koby Discord server, so that link will be in the description.
Once again, my evidence for this theory is it came to me in a dream.